the Clayman Institute for Gender Research at Stanford University. Reinvigorating gender equality in the 21st century.
So I'm going to ask you to do something for me. I want you to take a minute and think about it. I want to ask if you've ever said out loud the following sentence. You have to have said it out loud to someone else. I want to be number one in my field. I want to be the CEO of the company I'm in. I want to run for governor. I want to be the president of Stanford University. Stand up. Stand up if you have ever said that aloud to anyone else. Stand up. So I'm excited to see people stand up. And I'm here today to do just one thing. Just one thing. I'm here to give every person in this audience, every one of you, not just permission, but encouragement to stand up the next time that question is asked. Not just to be number one in your field, CEO, president, governor, but to do anything you're not sure you can do. Anything. The thing you're afraid to do. I want to do this for the men and the women who are here, but I want to especially do this for the women. Because the blunt truth is that men still run the world. Unequivocally, no question about it. There are 17 countries in our world that are run by women. Women have 20% of the parliament seats globally. You may have noticed the headlines I noticed when we got to 20% of the Senate. All these headlines, women are taking over the Senate. You're like, dudes, 20% is not a takeover. 20% is 1/5. There is no country in the world which has 5% of its large companies run by women. Not a single one. And even worse than the fact that these numbers are low is the fact that in many ways we've stopped making progress at the same rate. Women have held 14% of the top jobs in corporate America for 10 years. 10 years of exactly no progress. And all kinds of other trends that so many people in this audience study and understand are also either moving very, very slowly or not moving at all. And what this means is that when the decisions are made that most impact our world, whether they're in a boardroom or a university hall or a town hall or the shop floor, our voices are not equally heard. So I want to spend our time today talking about what holds us back from standing up. Why isn't it that every woman in this audience, every man in this audience, why isn't it that we all stood up? I'm going to ask you to raise your hand why you didn't stand up for those of you who didn't. I have 3 reasons I'm going to offer. It can be many. It can be all 3. It can be one of those. But I want you to take a minute and just think, why didn't you stand up if you didn't? First reason that holds us back. Stand up. Sorry, raise your hand if you didn't stand up because you're not sure you can do that job. You may not have the skills to be CEO, to be president. Stand up if you're not, raise your hand if you're not sure. You didn't stand up because you're not sure you have the skills. So self-confidence is a major determinant of what we can do. And here's what the research tells us. Compared to men in many instances, women do not feel as self-confident. If you ask men how they did on something, they'll often get it wrong a little high. And women will get it wrong a little low. And more importantly, if you ask a man why he was successful, he'll say, because of my own skills. He'll own that success, and that's a good thing. But if you ask a woman why she was successful, her reasons will be more like working hard, help from others, getting lucky. That's a very big difference, because if you attribute success to yourself, you know it's replicable. If it's because of your skills, when the next opportunity comes along, you know you can do it. But if it's help from others and getting lucky, well, those things might not show up the second time. So it's harder to raise your hand for the last opportunity. My message, the message of Lean In, is raise your hand, sit at the table, own your success. Don't let that be the reason you don't stand up for the top job. Second thing that holds us back, raise your hand if you didn't stand up because it's just distasteful to stand up. I mean, who stands up and says, I want to be CEO in front of everyone, right? Raise your hand. It's a little embarrassing, right? You might have actually stood up. You may have said that, but you're not standing up. I've talked a lot about ambition, and it's a conversation that makes a lot of people uncomfortable. So I want to be clear about what I don't mean and what I do. Here's what I don't mean. I don't mean that there aren't women out there that are just as ambitious as any man, because of course there are. And I don't mean that I have the answer and there is one form of ambition and everyone should want to be CEO of a Fortune 500 company. Of course that's not true. We all have to chart our own course and figure out our own goals. But here's what I do mean, and I want to state it unequivocally and unapologetically, that the studies show that starting in junior high, more boys than girls want to lead. If you ask, do you want to be president of your junior high school class? More boys than girls say yes. And it is that leadership ambition gap that we need to understand, acknowledge, and close. Because we will not close the leadership gap until we have more girls wanting to lead. I also want to be clear about where this comes from. It's actually not that surprising that fewer girls than boys or women than men raise their hand for leadership roles. These stereotypes that start in childhood are enormously self-perpetuating, and they lead directly to the success and likability penalty that Deb Gruenfeld first taught me about years and years ago. And that penalty holds us back. As men get more successful, they are better liked by women and men. As women get more successful, more powerful, they are often less liked by men and women. The good news is that this is a solvable problem. If we become aware of the gender bias that holds women back, if we become aware of the likability penalty women pay, we can change it, and we can change it now. The more we have women who are leaders, the more we will associate leadership characteristics with women. The more we have women who are leaders, the less we will be inclined to call our little girls bossy. So when you have a chance to stand up for leadership, stand up. And don't just do it for yourself. Do it because with every person who leans in, with every woman who stands up, we do our part to change those stereotypes. Third thing. Third reason you might not have stood up. Raise your hand if you didn't stand up because it's really hard to have those big jobs and be a good parent. Can't do it. Never see your kids, impossible. From my mother's generation to mine, we've made more progress in the workforce in many ways than we've made in the home. We still expect women to do the majority of childcare and housework, even though most women who are mothers in this country work full-time. And they do. Women do the great majority of housework and childcare. This fundamentally changes how women approach careers compared to men. Think of a career, having a career and a family, like having a marathon. Long, grueling, ultimately rewarding. You get to the start line. Men and women, equally trained. You could argue with the educational attainment of women in this country, women are even better trained, but let's say equal for argument's sake. Marathon starts, the men start running. What do they hear? What are the messages they hear? You've got this. Keep running. You've got this. You can do it. What do the women hear? Much more skeptical. You sure you want to do this? Does it make sense to start a race you may not finish? Don't you want kids one day? The race continues, the messages go on, the cries for the men get louder. You've got this, keep going, you're going to cross the finish line. The cries for the women get louder too. Should you be working when you have a child at home? Doesn't your child need you? Women understand the responsibilities they face, and the thing I've seen over and over in my career is they start preparing for those decisions way too early. I'm fully supportive of any decision a woman or man wants to make. Working in the home, raising kids is really important work. I just think people should make that decision once they have children. Because what I see is so many years before a woman has a child, women are quietly leaning back, making room for children and responsibilities they don't yet have, sitting next to men who are not making those compromises. Fast forward a couple years, by the time that woman has a child, she's working for that guy, even though she might have been better, or she hasn't gotten the raise that would have gotten her the money to pay for childcare, or she doesn't feel as fulfilled because she feels undervalued, because all of those years when she should have been leaning forward, she's leaning back. I'm not saying it's easy to do both or this is the right choice for everyone. I am saying that the best thing women can do, and men, is keep your options open. Make the hard choices when you have to make them, not years before, because you will inadvertently change the decision criteria you will face. I believe that if you think you might want to stay in the workforce, we need to teach women to start out aiming high. You can always take a step back. That option will always be open to you. But if you lean in, you may take a step back or make a decision to stay in based on a more senior position or a position you just like better and is more likely to get you to stay in. I'm also saying that we need to give men and women full choice. Full choice. And full and equal choice means equal encouragement. So what would the world look like? What would the world look like if those three reasons went away, if all of you stood up, if we got to equality, if we had 50% of our companies and institutions run by women and 50% of our homes run by men? I can't claim it'll be utopia with, flowers and guitar playing, even though it might be, actually. But I do think we know a lot. We know our companies would be more productive. Warren Buffett has famously and graciously said that he was so successful partially because he was only competing with half the population. When it comes to filling our leadership ranks, we are basically sourcing from half the population. And if we source from the whole population, we're going to do better. Our institutions, our companies, we're going to do better. We also know that on average, companies with more women in senior leadership roles have better work-life policies for women. And so this is not just about the women that get into the corner office. This is about the women that work in any company they work in, that work throughout our society. So how are we going to get there? What are we going to do? We all have to do our part. For the women, the message of Lean In is to believe in ourselves, aim high, understand that you can lead, fight back on the penalties against it. Remember that I didn't see the hands down at Facebook. We can reform our institutions, and we should. I believe in that. But the number one thing you have control of is you. You can sit at that table today. For men, do more to share responsibility at home, and all of us need to encourage that. Just like we don't encourage leadership in women, we don't encourage nurturing in men. We still call the class mommy and me. This is not welcoming. 4% of the stay-at-home parents in this country are men, 4%, and we don't make it easy. I have stories in my book of men who will say that they're on the playground, and not only are people not friendly, people are suspicious. That is not going to work. We need to encourage nurturing. I also believe we need to proactively work towards the women in leadership and change our institutions. We need to have the open and honest dialogue that I don't believe we've had about what's holding women back. So let's take a few examples. Mentorship and sponsorship. We know how important it is for careers. We know people that have mentors and sponsors do better. We know that men get more of them. We like people like us. But here's what we also know and we don't say. A man and a man alone in a room or even at a bar, what does that look like? Mentoring? What does a man and a woman alone look like? What does an older man and a younger woman look like? Every audience in DC said DC. I thought was kind of interesting. A recent survey found that 64% of senior managers who are men in America were nervous about being alone in a room with a woman. Mentorship and sponsorship is all about being alone in a room with someone. If we don't make them at ease about being alone in a room, we will not solve this problem. Let's talk about something else we never talk about. Helping women navigate through the childbearing years. We've gotten this wrong. What is illegal is it is illegal to discriminate based on gender, pregnancy, age, lots of characteristics, and those laws are important. It is not illegal never to mention those things. But we have decided that the best way to not have discrimination is never talk about it. Well, it is not working. I think change is starting to happen. Over 120,000 people are active in the Lean In community. There are circles popping up all over the country, and these educational videos are being watched and discussed. I believe what is core to the mission of the Clayman Institute was that knowledge leads to change. I believe deeply that equality is within our reach, and it's within our reach now. The hard work of the generations before us, of Deborah wrote, of so many people in this audience, of the women who founded the advisory board of the Clayman Institute, from Leslie to Mary Baker to Roberta Katz, So many of you have done so much that set us up for success right now. We get closer to the goal of true equality, person by person, institution by institution. We get closer to the goal of true equality with every single woman who sits at a table, who raises her hand, who leans in. I'm going to end where I began. How many of you want to be number one in your fields? How many of you can think of one thing you can do if you weren't afraid? Just one thing. Take a minute. What would you do if you weren't afraid? Stand up. Stand up if you can think of one thing you can do differently because you're not going to be afraid. One table you can sit at, one opportunity you're going to raise your hand for. And don't just do this for yourself. Do this for women all over the world. Thank you.
That was an amazing talk, just very inspiring.
Thank you.
I want to just take a step back first and ask you why you decided to write the book. Spend 2 years of your life doing this when you're obviously a busy person.
So I didn't get here in a very obvious way. You know, I write in my book that, you know, if you had asked me if I was a feminist a few years ago, I would have said no, probably, or I wouldn't have said yes at least. As of 2.5 years ago, I had never said the word woman aloud. Because that's not how you get ahead in the world, right? You don't go around talking about being a woman. First of all, someone might notice you're a woman. You know. Then, you know, you say the word woman in the workforce, you think the person on the other side of the table is going to think you're either, you know, about to sue them or asking for special treatment. Mm-hmm. For men, it's even worse. There's a story in my book of a man running a large institution. He says he'd rather talk about his sex life in public than talk about gender, right? It's a very unsafe topic. And, but what happened is that, you know, my kind of formative years as a manager have been the last 10 years. And I started seeing exactly what the data shows, which is that all the teams working for me, a lot of Stanford grads at Google and Facebook, at every stage, the men were in my office, at my desk, wanting the next responsibility, saying they could do more, and they were often right. And at so many stages, I would sit down with the woman and say, you should apply for this, or you should run the office. And she would say, I'm still learning in my job. Or, I'm not sure I'm ready for that. And I just never heard that from men. Mm-hmm. And so I believe that the institutions need to be reformed. I believe in public policy reform. But I also believe that we have internalized these stereotypes and it is now holding us back. And I didn't feel like anyone was talking about that. And so I took a deep breath and gave a TED talk on this against everyone's advice. People told me I'd be typecast as a woman. And you couldn't be both a business executive and a woman. And I gave this talk, and then I started getting letters and emails from women all over the world with all different circumstances saying, I got a raise. I got a better teacher for my child in a bad school where there aren't good teachers. I got my kid a good teacher. And, you know, I argued for something. And so that's why I did this, because I think the conversation needs to continue. I'm super excited about the book. I'm even more excited about leanin.org and the work we're doing with Clayman, because I think it is that community involvement offering these educational pieces that takes this from being a book, which I hope will help some people, but to really being skills that we can teach people and they can use.
That's great. That's great. You know, in your book, you write about that it's important for men to support women as they lean in, and I think that's something we would all very much agree with. I wonder what your strategies are for getting men involved in the move for gender equality.
Yeah, so a number of things. So Debbie Hemmeter is here. She's one of the founders of leanin.org. We've signed up over 160 partners. A lot of the large employers in this country, we've signed up, and they've made a public commitment to lean in, and we're offering our education modules and helping them send up circles. I think examples like John Chambers jumping in, Mohammed El Arian, who runs PIMCO, I've never met him. He's been giving talks about the book and how he needs to do better on women. I think as men see men do it. I think the most important thing we need to explain to men is don't do this as a favor. This isn't a favor. This isn't to be nice to your wife. This is for you. If you are the manager, you know, if John Chambers at Cisco makes Cisco a better place to work for women, he's going to have a competitive advantage recruiting 50% of the population. I talked to him today, that's what he said. He said, I want to be great at this because it's going to make my company better. Mm-hmm. And if you're the manager within your company who can talk about gender issues openly and therefore has more women who want to work for him, you're going to do better too. And there are also huge benefits to being a more involved father and husband. And so I think our message to men is do this for you.
The final question I want to ask you is, I think your book has really created this this wonderful moment of inspiration, and I want to hear what you have to think about how we can get from this moment to a movement, something that's more sustainable, and that we can keep this progress going forward.
Well, that's what we're doing with Clayman and leanin.org. We're doing three things: community, so not surprising if you're us, an online community, but we're building one, and you're seeing amazing engagement. We have Lean In stories up there. Condi Rice interviewed me last night. She posted hers yesterday. It's an amazing story, obviously a professor at Stanford. Her Lean In story starts out by being 16, being in college, and a professor in a class she was sitting in announcing that African Americans have lower IQ than whites. Just point blank, while she was in the room. 16 years old, freshman in college. And she raised her hand and said, "I don't think that's true." And that's a pretty important Lean In moment. I mean, she's gone on to do amazing things for this country and this university. And there are women there. There's a woman on there whose Lean In story is that she faced her rapist in court. She was raped, gunpoint. She didn't want to see him again. She testified, saw him, and she put him away for 31.5 years, no parole. Wow. And there are stories in there about women who, are working, very low-paid jobs and got their first raise. And it's pretty amazing. The second thing we're doing is education, which we talked about, and the third thing is circles, which I know Gina will come talk about. But we believe that if we bring people, men and women, together to form a community around gender issues and equality and leadership for women and nurturing for men, if we provide education and skills and tools, and if we can give people, in-person and online support through a circle of people that can be their peer mentors, we can change things one by one by one.